Roll. Action.
Hi, welcome to the Property Show. I'm Jayashree, Kurup. I'm editor at MBTV. I have with me our CEO, Sudhir Pai. Sudhir, thank you for joining us. We're talking about how to reduce the risk perception of real estate. And joining me in this is Rohit Gera. He's Managing Director of Gera Developments. There's Sona, Gaharwar, Senior VP from Tata Capital. And there is Karan Kumar, Chief Marketing Officer of DLF Limited. Thank you so much for joining us. And Sudhir, over to you. Would you like to set the context, please?
A very good afternoon to all our participants. I can see there are several hundred people who have registered so far. Thank you all for joining in what promises to be an interesting discussion on this topic. A warm welcome to all our three panelists as well. I think we've got representation today from the financial sector as well as two developers. We've got two very interesting developers on the panel as well. We've got DLF, who's pioneered the concept of build and sell in India. We've also got Rohit Gera representing Gera developers from Pune, who've typically played a slightly different game, a lot of skin in the game, a lot of developer equity at play, which in turn has helped them build an intergenerational kind of business. And we've got Tata Capital, well-known name in the real estate space, lending to consumers and to businesses alike. Before we kickstart proceedings, a bit of context, right? So in surveys that we've done with consumers, both recent as well as in the last few years, delivery risk has featured amongst the top two worries in the consumer's mind, right? And perhaps a little more in the last few months. Now, there are several reasons for non-delivery of a project, finance being one of them, labor being another, availability of construction material, etc. being others. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I think we will keep it to the financial aspects that possibly lead to delivery risk. Now, RERA, when it was formed, did take some measures to reduce risk of delivery by having that escrow facility, 70% of the money being allocated for the particular project. It has addressed a large part of the problem, but may not be everything that is sort of required. Now, there are three sources primarily that go into funding a project. There is the developer's own equity. There is funding which comes from various financial institutions, and there is the capital that consumers put up when they're buying a project. Now, if any of these three end up at some sort of risk to the plan that has been envisaged, there in turn ends up being some risk to delivery of the project. Now, based on how the COVID episode in the last couple of months have played out, each of these three elements are likely to see very different impact over the next few months, and that is what we will discuss, as well as mitigants to how to solve for this in the course of today's discussion. So with that, let me begin with a question, which I'd like really to pass on to all three panelists. But Rohit, we can begin with you. What in your mind, now we have a variety of consumers on the call, many of them buying their very first home, some who have already bought a home. So let's start from the basics. So what in your opinion are the causes for delivery risks? And given the current COVID environment, how do you see those factors playing?
So thank you for having me. This is a really interesting conversation, and I think it's very timely. So I'm glad you guys are doing this. The risks are numerous, and I think you've elaborated a lot of them. The one which I think also gets added on is the entire approval and government risk. You file for a plinth checking certificate, you file for an occupancy certificate, you file for water connections, drainage connections. It doesn't come. So those are also risks which we have to contend with. Of course, there's the finance risk, running out of money. So in the pre-RERA days, the big challenge and what RERA went and solved for on the finance risk side was that developers made the sales but took the money away. Right, so that was the finance risk that RERA really addressed. Okay, but today's finance risk that we see is that what happens if sales don't happen? Because like you rightly said, you have developer equity, you have debt or construction finance of some shape or form, right? You have either developer equity or landlord equity, which then pays for the land. You have construction finance or then the customer's money, which pays for construction. What happens if the customer money doesn't come in? You don't have adequate sales. So I think that on the finance side, as I see it, that's a large sort of risk, which wasn't envisaged in RERA, because RERA came around with a paradigm that sales will always happen, but the developers were taking the money away. So, I think that's something which is, like I said, this is a great time to be talking about this, because we're going to see sales happen, lesser, certainly for a majority of developers. I think good developers will continue to see early stage sales like we've seen. So that's something which does need to be addressed on the finance risk side. There's, of course, then there's execution risk, there's construction risk. And, consumers are best advised to look at developers' track record, see what they've delivered. Today, look at seeing whether there's actually concrete being poured on the site. I'd like to start right at the beginning and say, if you're getting a deep discount from a developer, be very cautious. Please make sure that that discounted money which you pay is actually going into the project and not to pay some old loan, past salaries or some past electricity bills. In which case, don't pay that 70% of the price, because you're never going to get your home. So please be really careful. These days, it's even more important to go to reputed developers with a track record where there is concrete being poured on the site.
Thanks, Rohit. Karan, if I may pass the question to you, you've taken a very different view in the last few years of wanting to build and sell. How do you see risk of non-delivery of projects? And in light of the COVID fallout, do you see some of these drivers playing out?
So I think, Sudhir, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on the panel. Absolute pleasure being here. That out of the way, I think Rohit has fairly comprehensively captured reasons of risk and the kind of risks that you can kind of foresee. So there's pretty much no point in repeating that. Suffice to say that if your building and construction is based on external cash flows, and the developer is dependent on that, and which he may not be entirely in control or command of in the post-COVID situation, then yes, delays on account of adequate cash not being available would obviously be a pretty straightforward and obvious reason. But outside of that, if you have decided to fund your own construction one way or the other, which is what we've done for almost all of our projects. I say almost all because the Camellias is the only project which we sell as a bare shell apartment right now. But outside of the Camellias, everything else that we sell is ready to move in. I think if you're in that space selling that kind of product, you're slightly better off. You're slightly more comfortable in terms of meeting your delivery timelines. There is another issue of how the migrant labor market moves forward. All of us are aware that a lot of laborers have moved back in fairly large numbers. Some projects and some developers will suffer more than the others. There have been developers and organizations which have been able to take care of migrant laborers in a much better proactive fashion during this period. And the exodus from those particular sites of projects has been relatively lower. But at an overall industry level, you know that migrant labor has headed back home, is heading back home. The time it takes for them to return when they have a certain sense of security of job when they come back could be anywhere between 3 to 4 to 5 months. Would that cause, or can that cause or be another reason for delay on timelines? The answer is yes. But as I said, sweeping statement aside, I think it'll depend on project to project, developer to developer, and how they've been able to take care of these important members of the stakeholders during this period. But yeah, pretty much outside of that, I think Rohit and you in your introduction comments have covered everything else.
Sona, do you want to weigh in?
Hi. Thanks, Sudhir, for inviting on the panel, of course. And I think largely Karan has covered and summed up what the points he's made and what Rohit has mentioned. He's clearly explained the labor. Rohit talked about the sales and how important it is, and at this time, and especially, and the collections, which is linked to the sales. The important part, of course, is that the demand continues, and how do we ensure that the boost remains in the market, because very, very important in the pandemic days and of course ahead also. So the demand boosters, one has to represent, I would say, as an industry, whether it is the developer, the real estate firm, it is the construction finance partners, the banks, lenders of the fund house. One has to keep addressing to the state government, central government, to RBI about the situation and the ask that one has. So in these times, so we are getting some part of our requirements, but most of it is left out. So whatever stimulus packages are coming, real estate as an industry, which is very, very large, it contributes almost 15% to the GDP if we consider the real estate and the construction, industry. So largest after agriculture actually. And we give employment, the industry gives employment to such a large number of people. So very, very important that we as an industry create ourselves to the state and central government at the same time. Yes, sometimes the worry is that whether the equity has stayed in the project or has it gone out of the project. So at the same time, the equity also has to remain in the project. If the equity has moved out, it has to come back also to the project. So which will give a lot of support as a project and even at a group level to the developer.
So now I'm going to bring one question. I'm going to address it first to you and then to the other panelists. The RBI at one point put the risk weightage of this industry at 150%, brought it to 125, brought it to 100. But as lenders, there still seems to be, the lenders are holding back lending to the industry at large. For those with huge fiscal discipline, DLF, Gera, that kind of, who have the ability to execute projects, money seems to be coming. But as an industry, the industry is crying out that we don't have working capital. Is it because there is not enough liquidity, or is it because there hasn't been fiscal discipline?
Very interesting question, and especially on this panel. There's no denying of the fact that the lenders are holding themselves back. But the point here is that how much trust are we creating and the perception that we are creating together. So when you look at the circle contains the real estate firm, the lender, the fund house, it is the government, the regulator, and what perception are we creating? We're creating a perception to the end user who's the home buyer. So I would say that put together, everyone has to be there in the game, and the skin has to be in the game. So it's not only the lender who's got the skin in the game, like Sudhir said, it has to be everybody. So when we talk, for example, when as Tata Capital or as a lender or a fund house, I would look at a project or a group level cash flow of a real estate firm. I would like to see and analyze, because a lot of times when you see that the leverages are very, very high. Why are the leverages high? Because a lot of times the equity is not there, or like equity is moved out. So it is important that the equity has to be brought back into the system. Very, very important when you're looking at the balance sheets and the project balance sheets. Another thing is, yes, the liquidity is there in the system, but nobody will get a comfort if the developer skin is not in the system. So risk aversion is very high outside. The environment is showing a lot of risk aversion. Liquidity is there. Develop the trust, because one will have to demonstrate it. You have to demonstrate, because you have there may be a lot of inventory which is there, and this is all hard inventory, hard security which can be offered. So, but are we demonstrating it, and is everybody demonstrating that they can, sell it, bring it back into the system? That is also important. And for real estate, see what happened and what was done by the mutual fund industry. There was a whole amount of road shows. They created that trust back into the system. Similarly, this is hard security, and this is hard real estate which is there. So there's a lot of confidence that can be done, and the building can be done.
Rohit, you represented the industry for a very long period of time, you and your dad. All developers are not on the same platform, right? They are in different stages. So what Sona said, the ability to say that if I have excess inventory, I also know how to liquidate it and bring liquidity back into the system. That seems to be the missing piece in this entire system today.
Yeah, it's monetized, the assets have to be monetized.
That's right.
Is the
yeah, get it.
So let me try and throw some light onto this. I think there's a number of different factors that are causing pain and suffering as far as developers are concerned. Certainly, some of them may be holding on to inventory, but don't have the ability to sell. Okay, some of them may not have inventory available, or you have inventory available, but the project is stuck. How do you jumpstart it? Somebody has taken out the money, put it into other land, and you say, okay, bring equity back. There's nobody buying that land. You're not willing to accept that as the equity of the developer, right? So I think the biggest, so there's two things which I'm going to say, and this I might get owned by my entire fraternity, but I think that there are two things that have happened. The world for the real estate industry has changed, and those of us who have kind of changed with it are able to meet today's requirements. The transparency levels required today are tremendous. The risk levels in the financial sector are tremendous. If we continue to expect that, like it was 5 and 10 years ago, you just make a phone call or you go somewhere, and so even the financial institutions now have adjusted their norms to lending based on a new paradigm. Those developers who continue to expect funding based on the old paradigm are not going to find any money from anywhere whatsoever, period. So I think unless and until developers change, that's not going to happen. The other big thing which I think we need to, as an industry, realize that Atmanirbhar really means every developer for himself, the real estate sector for themselves. This government has stated long ago that they're not going to do sector-specific preferential treatment for any sector. And as an industry, we can keep asking, but I think we need to have our contingent plans ready without that. One of the other ministers recently also said, look, unless you cut your prices down, you're not going to be able to sell. So the government's view is very clear. They're not going to come and help us. We need to read right on the wall and make the changes necessary internally.
Karan, you have said that, you were mentioning that even during the lockdown, it's surprising that you had a lot of sales happening at this point of time. Is this because there is a level of comfort in finished products? If the industry was not selling finished products, the consumer then says, whatever you've got finished is what I'm buying? Or is it that, and you have also as a group decided that you're going to build and then sell? Throw some light on this ready to move in demand.
Yeah, actually, so I think during the lockdown period, as we were talking before we started here, we've been able to do reasonably decent amount of business, and quite honestly surprising our own selves and our own initial estimates of what we thought we would do in the months of April and May. And we've seen that happening for a couple of reasons. One, and I go back to Rohit because he touched upon this concept of trust. I think in times like these, where there is enough and more paranoia and anxiety, people will veer towards brands that they know, that they recognize, they believe in, and they trust. People will go to brands which have honored their commitments and have a legacy of delivering on whatever the commitments are. So, starting point, such brands will always fare better than the other brands, right? The second aspect, of course, is given the fact that the risk appetite level overall is slightly muted right now. Yes, and very clearly and very decidedly so, people would prefer to move into ready to move in inventory. DLF sells a lot of that, as I'm sure do some of the other developers. But the choice of one brand over the other is largely linked to the first point that I mentioned. But yes, ready to move in definitely has a preference. Although I must quickly add that in the business that we've done, almost upwards of 100 crores during the period of the lockdown. We've also sold inventory like camellias, which is a bare shell product and not a ready to move in product. So we've sold a mixed bag. But yes, the preference is there for ready to move in. I think people are happy to appreciate what's standing in front of them, have a point of view on how good or bad it is, whether it works for them or doesn't work for them, and take a decision on that. But I think outside of this reason of buying inventory which is ready to move in, I think people, and this is what we've seen, people are also moving towards condominium living now more than ever before. So what this crisis has done has also provided some kind of a shock to people and moved them out of inertia of living in their standalone koti, villa, independent floor dwellings. Because I think people have figured out that during crises like these, pandemics like these, living in a community and being taken care of by the people who lead that community is a supremely important factor to ensure one's own comfort and safety, security precautions being taken. So we've also had a lot of interest from people who are first-time buyers, who are moving into, yes, ready to move in inventory, but not just because of that being the only reason. The reason of wanting to move and embrace community living has also found a much stronger resonance in these periods. So these factors combined is actually what has honestly led our business performance. All of us obviously wanted to do better, but we are happy with what we've done versus what we had originally anticipated these months to be as.
Sona, one of the things that Sudhir briefly touched upon was that RERA has actually de-risked real estate buying for the consumer to a small extent, because they've said that the money cannot be taken away from the project. But that still leaves that big problem there that the developer often, about 50% of the money to complete the project comes from consumer receivables. Should there be financial, are we moving towards a scene where there will be financial closure of projects even before you start selling the project?
Okay, just to understand, at what level does the financial closure really start? So while you conceive the project or you think of the project, the financial closures and the planning starts from that level. The financial closure plan has to happen at that time. Why is it so important? Because there will be raw material, which is the land, which gets acquired. One will have to think that whether this is coming out of the promoter's equity or is it coming out in the form of equity or debt instruments or funded equity. So that's also one part of it. So financial closures, and then once you get into approval stage, your financial the construction stage and the various milestones, the financial closure partner pitches in, and which is largely the bank or the HFC or NBFCs who pitch in. The fund houses come at a little earlier stages. There has been capital inflow challenges which have been there with the NBFCs and HFCs. And if you look at the entire situation, 60 to 65% of the real estate funding historically in the country was being done by the NBFCs and HFCs. And with the risk aversion being very, very high, there has been a challenge on this front. But at the same time, one has to see that the financial tie-ups are done at a level when you're conceiving the project. The monies start flowing in, and while you're planning the capital structures, the right capital structures have to be opted. In the sense that at what stage is it an equity instrument, a debt instrument, or the construction finance, hard goods construction finance that is coming. Second point is also the right financial partner. We've seen it all. We all witnessed last year and even earlier at the time of the global crisis in 2008, 2009. You need to make the right choice for your financial partner also. It should not happen that you have a sanction or letter in hand, or you have the project disbursals, part disbursals, the project midway or at a startup stage gets stalled. So at the same time, make the right choice of the financial partner, make the right choice for your capital structures. Liquidity is there in the system. The banks are there to support liquidity. And of course, at each milestone. So the projects also have to pick up at each milestone. And of course, then you have your monies which are coming through the cash flows from the consumers. So as the pace increases, your collections, your payments, they keep happening.
Right. Sudhir, you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to pass the question to Rohit, which is a similar question on financial closure. But just like the infrastructure companies or the utility companies, before they start a project, they often achieve financial closure, which means there is enough capital on the table to make sure that the project sees the light of day. Is it possible that we have something like this for real estate as well, in which, let's say there is no dependence necessarily on consumer sales, or even with a lesser amount of sale, the project is still able to see the light of the day? Is it possible to arrive at a structure like that? And if so, what needs to be done?
I think that is really the next level of risk the Indian real estate consumer is going to face. In the past, like I said earlier on, and Gera addressed the risk of capital being siphoned off or diverted elsewhere. This time around, I think this time's risk is going to be, some people bought the project, didn't have enough capital to actually get completed. That is a live possibility for a large number of projects across this country today. I think it's time that the financial institutions who are giving home loans need to start identifying and providing differential interest rates for mortgages for developers who come forward with full financial closure. What I mean by this is, you need to come forward as a developer, and if I go to a financial institution and say, look, this is the equity, whether it's my land, whether it's the landowners, whoever owns the land, it's a joint venture or my own, that's one part. The land is fully paid and provided for. My cost of construction is going to be X, right? I'm going to get 20% of that from pre-sales. 80%, I have a letter which I've got a construction finance term sheet in place. And here are the 20% bookings in hand. Now I've got full financial closure. Now that there is less risk as far as the lender is concerned for lending to my customer, I think it's about time that the financial institutions start giving a better interest rate to that borrower, because he's being and investing with a developer in a project which has complete financial closure. I think if we start doing this, we will get ahead of this problem. Otherwise, a year later, we'll be stuck with projects again, inadequate money again, right? And then we'll have some laws, Gera being modified, something else being modified, and the entire industry running helter-skelter. I completely agree. I think that that is time that we do look at financial closure, 100% financial closure. And please, if the mortgage institution, if the housing finance institution is therefore getting lesser risk, you have to necessarily pass on that benefit to the home buyer. It could be a 25 basis points reduction. You'll find over time, because of the lower risk, one sector of developers their customers will get home loans at a lower rate, and those which are higher risk will get a higher rate of interest. What's wrong with that? Why do all mortgage customers pay the same, regardless of the developer, his track record, or his financial closure? I think it's time.
That's a great point. Karan, can I bring you in? Which is, there is very little awareness in the market today, very little communication from the developer fraternity also on which projects have financial closure and which ones don't, right? That information does not go out to consumers at least, right? It may be available to the lender and to the developer, but it's not available with consumers. Do you think it's about time that developers who have strong balance sheets, the ones who have achieved financial closure, to seek to communicate with consumers?
Yes, for sure. For sure. I think that counterintuitively that answer has to be a yes. Some of us are publicly listed companies, so our financials and all details are available for anybody and everybody to kind of browse or see. Some of us are always in conversations with various analysts, giving them a constant commentary on what's happening inside the enterprise. And the analysts are forever speaking to other publics and media as well. So I think for developers who are listed, I think the degree of financial, shall I say, disclosure, or the disclosure of financial health and transparency is pretty much there. Should that be followed as a principled practice by everybody? For sure, the answer is yes, because you see, again, you come back to, well, these times have the anxiety meter on an all-time high, but people have for the longest time been anxious when they've come to investing in real estate. Right now, because of the pandemic, it's on a different level altogether. But the more honestly, transparently, clearly, unambiguously you can speak to your audience and giving them a complete idea of not just your group's financial position, but also the financial position and the strength of the individual project you're dealing with. I think it'll go a long way in any kind of decision making happening. Right now, for sure, for all the reasons that we discussed, but even otherwise, I think it's a good hygiene for the industry in any case to follow. So I wouldn't answer that question any differently.
So in a situation where the consumer has so much uncertainty all around, being able to figure out why I should buy now and what I should buy now seems to be a big ask. Now, Rohit mentioned that if there is financial closure, maybe better mortgage terms can be given to the consumer. But more than that, the consumer needs, even if he's buying something that is very close to completion, the consumer needs that confidence that you see, there's not going to be any more uncertainty around this project. How do you transmit that to the consumer? More communication, more, or is it that you will give him certain incentives to buy, knowing that there is a certainty of completion? How do you reach that?
No, I think insofar as we are concerned, for most of our projects, as I said, we sell ready to move in.
Yes.
So the entire concept of close to completion, how close to completion or how far away from completion is not, something that is particularly relevant to most of our projects. The Camellias, as I mentioned, is a project which is under construction, right? And we've been selling apartments, residences in a bare shell format. A lot of our customers who bought the Camellias have already started doing their fit outs, and they started doing their fit outs, a couple of months ago. Almost 200 odd families already in that process of completing that. Now, if there is a delay that happens in, let's say, the completion of a particular amenity or a tower or a particular feature, and things get pushed back by about a month or 2 months, I think it is fairly open and transparent to see for even the residents who are doing fit outs there, given what the situation in the labor market is, how we've actually been locked down for a certain period of time, how labor movement on the sites has not been necessarily possible, and even now, how labor is returning at only half the strength. So long as you have that kind of conversation completely open and transparently with your channel partners, with your current customers, with your prospects, with everybody who's there in the funnel, and you have an equity that people trust, a brand that people believe in, I think it's pretty simple and straightforward. I wouldn't be able to comment on behalf of a lot of other developers whose projects are at multiple stages of completion. But yes, and I don't say that as somebody being from the industry, but as a consumer, as an end customer, as an end user, I would certainly want to know as much as I can about what the financial capacity on that project is, and how much online it is with regard to its original commitments. Rohit made this very interesting point right at the beginning, saying that if somebody is going to sell something to you at 70% cost or 70% price, be very, very careful that the 70% that you're paying right now is headed in exactly the direction where it needs to head, and is not headed in another direction, right? So yeah, as transparent as those conversations can be, and we would always encourage buyers, consumers, investors, do as much research as you can on the financial health of the project and the developer. No amount of research is enough research. Do as much research as you can, and you will have, at least for some of us who are clearly listed and have a lot of stuff available in the public domain, you'll find enough and more information. The ultimate choice of who you want to choose and buy into is obviously of the end consumers.
There is also one more thing. The bankers are saying if you have ready inventory, drop prices and sell. Some of the ministers have come out and said, look, if you have inventory, drop prices, liquidate, and because in good times you've made money. Right now, if you have to lose money, so be it, but don't hold on to inventory. Rohit, at one point of time, I remember you telling me that real estate sells on the back of some kind of shortages, knowing that there has to be a reason to buy today. What is that reason that you can give to consumers? Because the minute you say drop prices, everybody assumes that prices are going to crash. Our price is going to crash, not necessarily. How do you make sure that the consumer understands the reality of the market and still comes out and buys?
Jayashree, I'm going to just quickly address your previous question very quickly.
Yes.
You asked about, is there any way to mitigate the entire risk of last mile or any level of completion?
Yes.
The answer is a clear no. Even if your project was all completed and you had filed your documentation for getting an occupancy certificate in the month of March, it's June and there's no sign of the occupancy certificate, right? So the kind of things that happen in the last mile and at the last minute, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong, and therefore, it's, if a customer is that concerned that I'm very, very concerned, I'm very fearful, this could get delayed, please buy something ready. Okay. On the other hand, look at the RERA declarations, look at the timelines, because post the RERA date, again, you get compensated anyway. So I think, the government has come up with ways to mitigate some of those risks. There are penalties for developers. I don't think that there's any reason to be paranoid as long as there is progress which is going on and you're dealing with a reputed developer. So I don't think that, that level of risk which is there, it's a small amount of risk, but let's not get overly fussed about it. In my view, if you are seriously fussed, buy something ready. If you can't get it in the primary market, look at it in the secondary market, right? Don't get stressed over it.
Right.
The other point is, look, there was this very famous, now for the last couple of days, one of the ministers who made a quote about cut your prices and sell. I don't think any developer gets any joy out of holding on to his inventory, and he's suffering on the other hand, paying interest rate to a bank, having vendors knocking on the door saying, look, you're not paying us, I have employees who are not getting paid. Nobody gets joy out of this, right? It's a systemic problem. We have to acknowledge that it's a systemic problem. RERA is only 3 years old. A lot of these projects are much older than that. Okay, we came up with RERA. We didn't have a way to get projects which were functioning in the old paradigm to switch over onto a new paradigm. Okay, merely cutting rates isn't going to solve the problem. And I'll tell you one of the important reasons why. If we sell, now they made it anything less than 10% below circle rates, the developer pays income tax on the difference between your selling price and the circle rate. Flat buyer pays income tax on the difference between the circle rate and his purchase price. Okay, the customer pays stamp duty on the circle rate price, which means effectively what you're telling a developer is, hey, cut your price by 20%, go below circle rates. Okay, but as the government, we will take all our entire pound of flesh based on our prices. How is that tenable? How is that equitable? Right? And I'll give you one other fact. In the state of Maharashtra, the year after demonetization, which everybody today acknowledges was a disaster for the real estate sector. November 16 was demonetization. April 17, the government of Maharashtra raised circle rates across the state. Right? For the last 3 years, the same circle rates, but 5 years prior to that, regardless of the state of the real estate sector, circle rates have been rising. And the last point on this ready reckoner and circle rates issue is no customer wants to buy below circle rates, because the moment you buy below circle rates, the assumption by the income tax department is that you pay money for this. Right? Nobody wants to attract the attention of the income tax department. So how do you expect people to come down and lower their prices? It is a systemic problem. There are developers who are happy to lower their prices. I have put out a tweet. We have some inventory in one of our projects. I will sell all of it at the circle. Will the government come by at the price that they say is a fair market price?
Okay. Right. Sona, we talked about developers having a good track record. Today, if the lender has, can a developer stand up and say, my lender is so-and-so, and I have so much money to complete my project? Can developers call out that my lender is supporting me? So it's almost like there is a developer, there's a lender, and together they're saying that, look, this makes this project very safe and good to buy.
Okay, so I'll give you the background. See, of course, the lender is the partner to the project once you are into the construction finance or as a fund partner. So you become the financial partner. At the same time, there are a few things, which are very, very important. How much participative are you with the developer onto the project, in the sense that do you also, so you should have the ability even and participativeness to venture into the pricing also, once the pricing is getting decided at various points in time, I would say. So not only at the start, but there are times when you realize that the pricing, like Rohit was saying, that a developer would not want to hold the inventory or have overhang of the inventory, because that impacts the entire financial status of the project. And he would not like to pay higher interest for a longer period. So for a financial partner, it is also important that he has a say while the pricing is getting decided, and at the times when the discounts and the rate cuts have to be offered, because that reduces the risk perception on the project clearly. So that is one point which should happen. Second, while being the financial partners, you want to have much more access to the ERP, the account system, the MIS of the developer, because that helps you to decide that at the various milestones, are you going right, are you not going right? So real-time data access should also be available to the financial partner when you say that, yes, I am supporting and I'm partnering in the entire project from the start till the end, till the completion. So very, very important. And I would say that we would encourage, and all the banks, lenders, fund houses should encourage such developers, Rohit. And of course, DLF, we see that the systems are good, the processes are good with a lot of developers, while there are a lot of such people, real estate firms, who are not following the processes. So they need to be transparent, they need to be high on technology. The integration should happen between the developer and the financer on the systems also. So because you get a lot of real-time access to a lot of data. And I would say even the early triggers, you are getting to know the moment you have real-time data available. So with the help of technology and the people who are savvy on technology, all lenders and bankers should encourage the real estate firms.
Sudhir, you want to jump in?
Not really. I think we should go for the questions. A lot of questions have come in.
Yeah. And we are at about 45 minutes, so I think we can start with the questions.
Yeah, okay. Let me start with the first one that I'm noticing here on the screen. Question from Aman Siddiqui. This question is, can consumers check project finance statement of project or of the developer? That's the question. I think what is probably meaning is, where do I get access to checking the statements of, let's say, a non-listed developer? I think a listed developer has a lot of data which people can access, but what's the source for me to do my research? Rohit, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think really there isn't any source as such. And frankly, while listed developers do provide information into the public domain, and there's a lot of information which they're required to provide by the regulators, I think it's very hard for a layperson who wants to buy a home to be able to decipher that quantum of data at the specific project level. It's virtually impossible. So today we are not geared up to reporting at a project level, and even from a private developer, it's virtually impossible. So right now, no, I would say that it isn't possible. At least to my knowledge, it isn't possible, even with a listed developer.
Right. So Karan, do you want to take that question? I mean, as a consumer, we keep asking consumers, you should do your research thoroughly about a project, do your due diligence before buying in, and make sure you understood all the risks. Where does he get the information?
So yes, I think in some cases that information is not readily available in the public domain at all. And in some other cases, as Rohit mentioned, even if it is available, it's very difficult to decipher. I think one of the places where you get a whole lot of help and assistance from is in case if you want to take loans and want to finance that project, your bankers come and play a very important role for you in helping you do credit worthiness or risk assessment of the projects that you want to invest in. And if you're working with certain wealth managers who are also advising you on your various portfolio investments, then they would also come in and play a very strong role in helping you navigate through the maze of information that you may have available or you may not have available at all. But outside of that, I think you'll have to do as much secondary research as you can do on your own. Meet as many senior people within the sales teams of various projects that you're interested in, and have as detailed conversations as you can have. Understand as well. There is no shortcut to this. Fortunately, unfortunately, this is something, and it's going to be a big amount of money that you're going to be investing, especially if it's going to be for end use. Then it's going to be one of the very few investments that you will make in your life of this kind of ticket size. So as much of time and energy you can spend in this, and also work with your advisors, could be channel partners, could be wealth advisors, could be the banks that you would be partnering with. As much information as you can get, you should. And then there is always the opportunity to write to individual project owners as well, if you have specific queries. And I'm sure individual project owners and project managers will also come back to you with specifics that you want answered and which you haven't been able to find an answer for.
Sona, that question, yeah. I was actually going to bring it to you. When a consumer takes a loan from a bank, the bank's due diligence, can you rely on that the bank has actually figured out that this project can go through?
Yeah, absolutely. You can rely on the banks. So I'll just give you the background to it, because see, governance and compliance are a key focus for any financial institution or a bank. So if a bank, and now with the compliance norms, if a bank or a financial institution gets into as a financial partner or a CF is being given on a project, it has to be a part of the brochure of the developer, the real estate firm of that project. It has to be a part. It gets highlighted that the project has been funded by so-and-so bank or financial institution. At the same time, it's a compliance norm that one has to adhere, that it is also highlighted outside at the project site. So even at the site, there is a defined format under which one has to put it at the developer side, that this is a project which is funded by this bank or financial institution. First point. Second point, also what you were asking, that has it thoroughly been checked? Yes, it's been thoroughly been checked, and at the bank or the financial institution is fully responsible for the approvals in advance which are being given on the project funding. So whether it is a CF or at the time when it is a home loan, both the times the advanced processing on the legalities, technicalities, all the parent approval, mother approval, smaller approvals, everything is checked by the bank, and accordingly they take the ownership to it.
This may not have happened for a few years in between. Otherwise, the volume of retail finance that was given out and the kind of projects that have got completely held up. I think at some point the bank due diligence did drop a little, but after the tightening of norms, a lot of RBI norms, which is why the risk weightage was raised to about 150%. But now I think the system is again back to more or less a normal scenario, right?
The system was always there. I would not say that compliance was not being adhered or the governance was not earmarked. Of course, the systems were there. RBI has always been loud about it. But at the same time, how much has it been adhered by each of these banks, and especially all the NBFCs and HFCs, which one gets to know when all these NHB audits happen time to time. The ratings get impacted for these NBFCs, for these HFCs, if the compliance are not followed. Yes, the tightening of norms have happened in the last 3-4 years. It has been much more. And that is why you are able to bring in a lot of trust into the industry. So we keep hearing all this news that the credit ratings get impacted for those NBFCs and HFCs. And they are facing the problems also today. So there are not too many large ones which are able to withstand with the pressures which are there all around. But yes, of course, there have been capital issues also. But compliance issues have always been, indicated, and NHB and RBI has been hard on it.
Jayashree, can I just jump in on that for a second?
Yes.
Pre this ILFS crisis which took place, okay, there was a huge party which took place for the last few years before that. Financial institutions, the new age financial institutions, were very happy to fund developers, very happy to offer them cash outs, very happy to offer them part C, part this, use the money for land acquisition. It was a big party, right? So yes, the reputed ones, the ones who have been functioning for a long time, similar in the developer category as well, right? Those who are here from a long-term, multi-generational kind of outlook continue to be conservative and follow all the rules and the discipline. Okay, there was a breed of, I would say, cowboys funding other cowboys, right? And today, some of the problem that you're seeing is emanating from that group of people who thoroughly enjoyed a part.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to differentiate between the players who are able long-term, multi-generational, both at the housing finance, both at the developer finance side, as well as the developers, and separate it out from the others.
Right.
Just to quickly get small last addition is that especially in the HNI base and the projects that are available and of value to them, and these are also clients which are working with a lot of wealth management firms now. And a lot of the wealth managing firms now are creating specialty real estate practices within their setups and providing a whole lot of advisory on real estate as an asset class. So this is another set. I know this would be a small sliver of the overall population and of all the projects available, but in this sliver, nonetheless, you have the opportunity of having extremely detailed and expert advice from your wealth advisors as well on real estate and various projects as individual investment options. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think that's like we have the advisors, the financial advisors for everybody in the stock market, in the equity space. As this market cleans up, I'm going to see a new generation of advisors who will advise a lot of people, saying it's not that you put your money in and take it out after the third installment. It will be people who will say that this is a stable investment. It's an appreciating asset. So how do you invest in it? Teaching the consumer how to invest in real estate. We will see investment back, but we will see investment only when you have that breed of advisors coming in. And I like that point, Karan. Good point that you made. There are a lot of people who picked up our conversation around prices and said, will there be a price correction rather than keeping unsold inventory? Isn't it better to sell at lower prices? That was one. And I think that, and these are all coming on our Facebook. There are a lot of people logged in on our Facebook accounts. We are live on Facebook right now. And there is another person called Rajesh Sharma who says the amount of unsold inventory is higher. Due to change in reform and current market condition, the demand has fallen by almost 40%. I'm not sure where the numbers are coming from. Is it wise to sell the inventory at a lower cost when they make marginal profit rather than holding the inventory and waiting for markets to bounce back? I think you've addressed this issue, but a lot of consumers are actually addressing this price issue. And I think it's important because unless this is settled and we keep talking about it on what is realistic pricing, the consumer is still going to hold back and say, I think prices will fall.
Sure. So you want me to take that?
Yes, please.
So look, I think one has to look at a slightly longer duration. Look at what's happened to prices in the last 5 to 7 years. For the most part, across the country, prices have been flat, drifting negative. At the same time, as developers, we've been faced with inflation. So our cost structures have gone up. At the same time, we had GST, which was brought in. GST was passed on customer. Then the government went and changed the rule that came midway and said, hey, guess what? You can't pass through that, the GST on 16% on your cost of construction. You can't pass that either. That too is being borne by the developer. My own view, and certainly, the place to look at the listed developers, and you see prices and you see sentiment around that. Things don't look very rosy. So I don't think that there is a large scope for price reduction. When you look at saying, yes, if a developer has to cut price and take a loss, if you have no choice, you have no choice. But then you can't fault that developer if he says, no, my own instinct is that the price will rise. I want to speculate in my own inventory. You're not going to tell him that you forced to sell or you have to sell. It's his call, it's right. This is a free market, right? So let the developer sell if he needs to sell. And if the need, developers are entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur understands that if he needs to make a sale and cash flow is hard, he'll cut the price and sell. The customer needs to be really careful. Once again, at the cost of repeating myself, be careful if you get the price cut. Why is he cutting the price? Why does he need the money, and where is the money going to go? Is the money, the reduced money that you're going to pay, actually going into your project? And I will bet 99 times out of 100, a developer is deeply cutting prices not to put the money into your project. 99 times out of 100, it's because there are other debts, there are other outstandings. So please, for God's sake, do a good deal, negotiate hard, but please don't get swayed by a deep discount. And then, you'll be stuck 5 years later, hoping the government bails you out. Don't say you weren't warned by a real estate developer.
Sudhir, I think there's a query for you on our Facebook platform saying that as a channel, will Magicbricks put this kind of research for consumers, any kind of research tool here? Would you like to talk about it?
Well, should have been directed at our panelists. But, to take it, look, we've been very keen, and which is part of the reason I've been asking Rohit, Karan, and so many other developers that if there is, for example, certification done by one of the rating agencies, or if there is some information on financial closure, or any material information that allows a consumer to research a project thoroughly well and convince himself that, hey, look, I am buying from not just a developer who has had a lot of reputation in the past, but I know that the project I'm putting my money on is also reasonably secure financially, and therefore my possibility of getting the project is there. That information I think would be more than happy to put up on the site. But of course, we have a dependence on securing this information from our customers.
Can I just jump into it? Look, I think yes, consumers can do so much research, but it's so easy for a financial institution to just start saying, okay, 25 basis points reduction if the developer has given us financial closure details. Full disclosure, okay? Full financial closure. Here's your documentation of your loan, term sheet signed, funding in place for construction. We will give that customer a reduction in the interest rate. I will guarantee customers will flock to get to that developer, other developers will start following, it will become the norm. You won't need to do it on your site. The consumer won't need to do the research. It just means somebody has to take the responsibility, mitigate their own risk. It's just smart business sense. Can some financial institution please start this? I will guarantee you across the country, you will have a few hundred developers signing up tomorrow morning for this.
And I'm going to take the last question of the day. I think we're very close to, we are a minute over, in fact. I just wanted to ask, someone has asked, Vijay Panchbhai has asked, is the subvention scheme really beneficial to home buyers? Right now, subvention schemes are not allowed. The NHB has come down hard on subvention schemes. But do you see in this situation where consumers want to conserve their cash in hand, do you see subvention schemes coming back again in a more safe mode?
Karan, you want to take that? I've spoken a lot.
No, you take the lead and I'll follow up on you.
Okay, so I think subvention schemes are a really good product. From the consumer's point of view, you pay a part payment now, you're risk-free for a duration. I think why the NHB and the RBI came down on this is because the developers were using this as a source of cheap capital. And I think that's not cool. I agree with that. And therefore, we need to offer the consumer that safety net and that peace of mind, and yet solve for the cheap money, then the developer not delivering. So I think it certainly serves a purpose. The RBI concern and the NHB's concern is very, very valid and correct. But I think there needs to be a dialogue to solve for the customer's need, as well as the protecting the customer, which is the RBI's longer term goal.
Actually, it was part of that cowboy party that Rohit was talking about. That's what spoiled the subvention scheme, because intrinsically it was a good scheme. It helped both sides. Karan, you want to jump in?
No, so yeah, so to Rohit, see, the thing is this, that if it's a scheme that works for you from the point of view of your investment capability and capacity, if it's something that's available and it works for the kind of horizon and the manner in which you want to structure your investment, sure, go for it. Absolutely, why not, right? All the other citrus paribus in place, as Rohit mentioned, right? But again, I'll come back to something which we've spoken, I think, a lot about today, which is the subvention scheme aside, go for developers where you know that the money that you're going to pay is going to get into projects which need that money and flows directly into them. Let not a scheme being provided by one developer in any way, cloud your objective assessment on whether or not you should invest in that particular project. You've chosen the project, you're sure about the project that you want to invest in that project. If there is a subvention scheme that's available, and it's a scheme that works better for you in terms of how you want to structure your investment, go for it, 100%. But let that not be the one of those factors which sways your purchase decision, because in times like these, and as in any times, but especially in times like these, you would want to be as intelligent and as well researched on where you would want your money to be invested. And I have no doubt that real estate will actually come back very strongly as an investment class, as an asset class for investment. I think Sona said this earlier in this conversation. The AMFI did a fantastic job in getting the mutual fund story out. Maybe it's time for the real estate body of people also put together the story on how real estate, especially residential real estate, will emerge as a strong asset class for investments. But I think, yeah, those are some of the thoughts that I'd like to leave you with. If subvention, to your specific point, works for you, go for it. Works for the kind you want to structure your investment or payouts, go for it. But let that not be the factor which sways you in making your choice.
Yes. Actually, what both of you have said, what Rohit has said, be careful about which project you're going with, not just, and what you said, it's not just the subvention, it is the project that should determine your decision. Sona, closing thoughts from you about subvention schemes?
So where I'll just take you back to what has happened in the past, and what of course you hinted at, that where has all these concerns which got raised from the customers, and we need to differentiate the cowboys, basically saying that they who got benefited from the scheme and who did not get benefited. So a lot of customers who got benefited from the scheme specific to the projects, and like Karan is saying, we know a lot of such projects by the larger developers also who got benefited. But at the same time, you also have to see with the crisis which is on, we have been able to differentiate in the last 2 years, you know, who's a home buyer, the end user, and who's an investor. So this is where I come from, that you've been able to differentiate. Now, are you pulling in the investor once again into the industry? Depends how much of this investor that you want to bring into the industry, because there is huge demand as far as the end user, the home buyer is concerned. There is huge demand already, and where RBI and where NHB are coming from, they want to encourage the home buyer, you know, taking up these units or apartments rather than investors and the change of hands, and which is what was getting encouraged with the subvention schemes. I'm only talking, Rohit and Karan, of the point, you know, maybe 30% or 40% of those customers who got benefited. Yeah, you've already talked about it. So this was a concern which got raised, and the encouragement to the home buyer was something that one wanted to give. This is why the subventions have been taken away, and some people who have tried to you know, pull out the cheap money, you know, and used it into various other projects or taken out the money. This is that, you know, that is where RBI and NHB has played a role, saying that we would like to discourage this entire thing.
A legitimate concern, right? This is you've hit the nail on its head, and those concerns are entirely legitimate because of what you saw happening. Yeah, so yeah, completely in agreement. Completely in agreement, Sona.
Sona, do you want to take up Rohit's offer of offering lower rates of interest to consumers from Tier 1 developers?
So, what Rohit has offered is absolutely correct, because I definitely believe the CF person, the company which is giving the CF, and the company which is doing the home loan largely should be the same bank or the lender, because there is a lot of benefit which comes. Rohit has indicated one of the benefits, how it induces or how it pushes the sales velocity. At the same time, there are many other benefits, because your processes get better, you get real-time updates on the project, because your CF team and the home loan team of that bank can work together and structure a lot of things in terms of sales, inducing the sales, and also in terms of making things very simplified for the customer, because all approvals are there in place. The customer can just go digitized, apply for a loan, and take his loan disbursals without getting into any you know, complicated processes. So as a package, it serves much better.
Sudhir, some closing comments from you?
Yeah, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I can see a compliment from Rajesh Sharma. Thank you, Mr. Rohit, for being transparent, outspoken, and expressing the pain point and future walkthroughs. I think likewise to all panelists. I think thank you all. You've been very frank, very candid with your comments. It's been a great conversation. We'll keep the video posted on our YouTube channel as well, so that consumers who sort of missed out from the show could still see a recording later. Thank you all so much for participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.